The scent of rain-soaked wood and approaching dawn filled the air as Kade Whitmore stepped out of the Red Canyon Saloon in Platteville, Colorado, his boots scraping against the weathered planks of the walkway. Spring of 1883 had brought unseasonable cold to the mountain town, and he pulled his coat tighter as he made his way down the deserted Main Street, the sound of his spurs jingling in the pre-dawn silence. He had just finished a long night of poker that had left his pockets heavier and his mind sharper, though fatigue was beginning to creep into his bones. The kerosene lamps along the street flickered weakly, casting dancing shadows across the storefronts and hitching posts, and it was in one of those pools of dim light that he saw her. She was curled up on the bench outside the general store, her thin shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, trembling even in her sleep. Her auburn hair had come loose from whatever arrangement it had been in, cascading across her face and the worn wood beneath her head. She wore a dress that might have been fine once but was now dusty and wrinkled from travel, and her small carpet bag sat on the ground beside the bench, one hand clutching the strap, even in unconsciousness, as though afraid someone might steal it. Kade stopped walking, his conscience warring with the practical side of him that said a lone woman sleeping on a bench was none of his concern. But his mother had raised him better than that, even if she had passed on 5 years ago. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, and knelt down beside the bench. Up close, he could see that her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes speaking of exhaustion that went beyond a single sleepless night. Her lips were faintly blue from the cold. "Miss," he said softly, reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. "Miss, you cannot sleep out here." She jerked awake with a gasp, her eyes flying open and revealing irises the color of spring grass. For a moment, she looked terrified, scrambling back against the bench as though he might attack her, and Kade immediately raised both hands to show he meant no harm. "Easy now," he said in the same tone he used to calm skittish horses. "I am not going to hurt you. But it is too cold to be sleeping outside, and the sun will be up soon. This is not a safe place for a woman alone." She stared at him, her breathing rapid, her eyes darting from his face to the empty street beyond, as though calculating her chances of running. Slowly, the panic in her expression faded, replaced by something more guarded but less afraid. She seemed to be taking in his appearance, the quality of his clothes, the silver buckle on his belt, the lack of threat in his posture. "I must have fallen asleep," she said, her voice hoarse. "I was waiting for the morning stage, but I suppose I was more tired than I thought." "The morning stage does not come through until 10 o'clock, Kade said gently. "That is still 5 hours from now. You will freeze if you stay out here." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I have a guest room at my ranch. It is about 2 miles outside of town, but it is warm and safe. You could get some proper rest and a hot meal, then come back for the stage." Suspicion flickered across her face, and Kade could not blame her. A strange man offering his home to a lone woman in the middle of the night had all the makings of a dangerous situation. He tried again. "My name is Kade Whitmore. I run the Double W Ranch with my younger brother Connor. We raise cattle and break horses. You can ask anyone in town about me come morning. I give you my word as a gentleman that you will be safe." She studied him for a long moment, her teeth chattering slightly from the cold. Finally, she seemed to come to a decision born more of desperation than trust. "My name is Eleanor Ramsey," she said quietly. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Whitmore. I confess I am quite cold." Kade stood and offered his hand to help her up. She hesitated only a second before taking it, her fingers small and icy in his calloused palm. She swayed slightly when she got to her feet, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. She was shorter than he had expected, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. He picked up her carpetbag without asking, and she did not protest. "My horse is at the livery," he said. "It is not far." They walked in silence through the sleeping town, their footsteps echoing off the false front buildings. Eleanor kept her arms wrapped around herself, and Kade noticed she was favoring her left foot slightly. The livery stable was dark except for a single lantern hanging by the door, and Kade let himself in with the ease of familiarity, leading Eleanor to where his bay gelding, Buck, stood dozing in a stall. "He is a beautiful animal," Eleanor said, the first words she had spoken since they left the bench. There was something wistful in her voice, and Kade wondered about her story. "He is a good horse," Kade agreed, saddling Buck with practiced efficiency. "Steady and smart. I have had him for 6 years now." Within minutes, they were ready. Kade swung up into the saddle, then reached down for Eleanor. She looked at his outstretched hand with some trepidation. "You will have to ride with me," he explained, "unless you would rather walk 2 miles in the cold." She shook her head and reached up. He grasped her hand and forearm and pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion. She settled awkwardly behind the cantle, clearly uncomfortable with the intimacy of the situation, her hands hovering uncertainly at his sides. "You will need to hold on," he said. "I will not go fast, but the road is rough." Tentatively, her hands came to rest at his waist, barely touching him. Kade clicked his tongue, and Buck moved forward into the night. They left Platteville behind, following the road that wound through the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep blue, and stars still glittered overhead in brilliant profusion. The air smelled of pine and sage, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Eleanor's grip on his waist gradually became firmer as exhaustion overtook her caution, and by the time they crested the hill that looked down on the Double W Ranch, Kade could feel her leaning against his back, half asleep again. The ranch spread out below them in the pre-dawn light, the main house a solid 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Beyond it stood the barn, the bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings, all neat and well maintained. Cattle dotted the pastures in dark clumps, and horses moved like ghosts in the nearest corral. "We are here," Kade said softly, and felt Eleanor jerk awake behind him. They rode down to the house, and Kade dismounted, then helped Eleanor down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her around the waist. "When did you last eat?" he asked, frowning at how light she felt, how fragile. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. "I had a biscuit at a way station." Kade shook his head and guided her toward the house, leaving Buck ground tied for the moment. The front door was unlocked, as it always was, and he led her into the dark interior, fumbling for matches to light the lamp on the hall table. Warm light filled the entryway, revealing a home that was masculine but well kept, with sturdy furniture and woven rugs on the polished wood floors. "The guest room is upstairs," Kade said, picking up the lamp. "But first, let me get some food in you." "I do not want to impose," Eleanor protested weakly, but Kade was already heading toward the kitchen at the back of the house. "It is no imposition. Sit down before you fall down." The kitchen was large and functional, with a cast iron stove, a deep sink with a hand pump, and a long table that could seat a dozen men at branding time. Kade stirred the coals in the stove back to life and added wood, then set about making coffee and warming up the leftover stew from dinner. Eleanor sank into a chair at the table, watching him with those green eyes that seemed to take in everything. "You cook for yourself?" she asked. "Connor and I take turns, though we have a woman who comes in twice a week to do the heavy cleaning and laundry. We manage well enough." "Where is your brother now? Sleeping, I expect. His room is on the far side of the house and he sleeps like the dead. A cavalry charge could come through and he would not wake. Kade poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug and set it in front of her. Be careful, it is hot. She wrapped her hands around the mug as though it were precious, letting the heat seep into her fingers. Kade ladled stew into a bowl and placed it before her with a spoon, along with some bread he sliced from the loaf in the cupboard. For a moment, Eleanor just stared at the food and he saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "Thank you," she whispered, and there was such emotion in those two words that Kade felt something twist in his chest. "Eat," he said simply, and busied himself with his own cup of coffee while she did. She ate slowly at first, as though her stomach needed to remember what food was, then with increasing speed. Kade refilled her bowl without comment and she ate that too. When she finally set down her spoon, there was color in her cheeks and she looked more present, less like a ghost. "I apologize for my hunger," she said. "I have been traveling for several days and my funds ran out faster than I anticipated." "You do not need to explain," Kade said, "but if you want to talk, I am willing to listen." Eleanor looked down at her empty bowl, her fingers tracing the rim. "I left St. Louis 3 weeks ago. I was engaged to be married, but I discovered my betrothed was not the man I believed him to be. He had another woman, a mistress, and he made it clear that he had no intention of ending that relationship after our marriage. When I confronted him, he laughed and said that was simply how men of his position conducted themselves." Her voice was steady, but Kade heard the hurt beneath it. "I could not marry him. I would not. But my parents insisted, said I was being foolish and romantic, so I left. I took what money I had saved and bought passage west. I thought I might find work as a teacher or a governess. I have an education and I am good with numbers and letters." "That took courage," Kade said, meaning it. "Or foolishness," Eleanor replied with a bitter little smile. "I see now that I did not plan well. I had enough money to get me to Denver, but I fell ill on the train and had to pay a doctor. Then I had enough for a stage to Platteville, but not enough for lodging and the next stage out. I thought I could simply wait through the night, but I suppose exhaustion got the better of me." "Where were you headed?" "Silver Creek. I heard there is a school there that needs a teacher." "Silver Creek is another 2 days by stage," Kade said. "And the road between here and there can be rough this time of year. You would be better served to stay here a few days, regain your strength, and let me ask around town. There might be opportunities closer." Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "I could not possibly impose on your hospitality for that long." "It is not an imposition," Kade said firmly. "The room is empty and we have food enough. Besides, my mother would rise from her grave and haunt me if I sent a woman alone back out onto the road in your condition." A smile ghosted across her face, a real one this time. "Your mother sounds like she was a formidable woman." "She was. She ran this ranch alongside my father until he died when I was 15. Then she ran it alone until Connor and I were old enough to take over properly. She passed 5 years ago, but I still hear her voice in my head, telling me to do better, be better." "She raised a good son," Eleanor said softly. Kade felt heat rise in his face and cleared his throat. "Come on. Let me show you to that guest room before you fall asleep in your chair." He picked up a fresh lamp, and Eleanor followed him back through the house and up the stairs. The guest room was at the front of the house, with windows that looked out over the valley. The bed was made with clean linens, and there was a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a dresser, and a comfortable chair by the window. "There is water in the pitcher," Kade said, setting the lamp on the dresser. "It will be cold, but if you want a hot bath in the morning, there is a bathing room at the end of the hall. I will have Connor haul water for you." Eleanor stood in the doorway, looking at the room as though it were a palace. "This is too much," she said, her voice thick. It is a bed and a roof, Kade said. Nothing more than any decent person deserves. Sleep as long as you need. No one will disturb you. He left before she could argue further, closing the door behind him. He stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the silence of the house, then headed downstairs to put Buck away properly and tend to the morning chores. The sky was fully light now, painted in shades of pink and gold, and the ranch was beginning to wake around him. Eleanor slept through that entire first day. Kade checked on her once, opening the door just a crack to make sure she was still breathing, and found her curled on her side beneath the quilts, her face peaceful in sleep. He closed the door quietly and went about his work, feeling strangely protective of the woman sleeping in his guest room. Connor appeared at breakfast, a younger and lankier version of Kade, with the same dark hair but lighter eyes. "Whose carpetbag is that in the hall?" he asked around a mouthful of eggs. "We have a guest," Kade said. "Her name is Eleanor Ramsey. I found her sleeping on a bench in town last night and I offered her the guest room." Connor's eyebrows rose. "You brought home a strange woman." "I brought home a woman in need of help," Kade corrected. "She is traveling alone and ran out of money. She is respectable, educated. She was on her way to Silver Creek to apply for a teaching position." "And you just believed her story?" "Yes," Kade said simply. "You will understand when you meet her. There is nothing false about her." Connor studied his older brother with interest. "You like her." "I feel responsible for her. There is a difference, if you say so." Connor grinned and took another bite of eggs. "When do I get to meet this mysterious woman?" "When she wakes up." She was exhausted and half frozen. Let her rest. But Eleanor did not emerge that day, and Kade found himself wondering if she was well, if he should send for the doctor. He decided to wait until morning, and if she was still asleep then, he would take action. She appeared just after dawn on the second day, hovering uncertainly in the kitchen doorway while Kade fried bacon. She was wearing the same dress, but her hair was neatly pinned up now and some of the exhaustion had left her face. "Good morning," Kade said, surprised at how pleased he was to see her awake. "How are you feeling?" "Embarrassed," Eleanor admitted. "I slept for an entire day. I did not even hear anyone come in to check on me." "You needed the rest. Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." She sat, folding her hands on the table. "I should probably go back to town today. The stage will be coming through and I need to find a way to earn money for passage." "Or you could stay here a few more days and let me ask around," Kade said. "I meant what I said about opportunities closer than Silver Creek. Platteville has been growing and so have the surrounding towns. There might be something." Before Eleanor could respond, Connor burst into the kitchen, pulling up short when he saw her. "You must be Miss Ramsey," he said, his face breaking into a wide smile. "I am Connor Whitmore, the better-looking brother." "And the more modest, too," Kade said dryly. Eleanor smiled, a genuine expression that lit up her whole face and made something in Kade's chest tighten. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Whitmore. Just Connor, please. We are not formal around here." They ate breakfast together, and Kade was gratified to see Eleanor eat with good appetite. Connor kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Eleanor about St. Louis and her journey, telling stories about the ranch and the town. He had always been the more social of the two brothers, easy with words where Kade was more reserved. "So you are a teacher," Connor said. "We could use someone like you around here. The school in town is bursting at the seams and Mrs. Henderson, who runs it, is about 70 years old and nearly blind. She keeps teaching because there is no one else." "I would be happy to help," Eleanor said, "though I suppose that depends on whether the town would be willing to hire someone like me." "Someone like you?" Kade asked. Someone who ran away from home, who defied her family, Eleanor said quietly. I have no references, no letters of recommendation. For all anyone here knows, I could be lying about everything. Are you lying? Connor asked. No. Then there is no problem, Connor said cheerfully. We will go into town today and talk to people. Kade is well respected around here. If he vouches for you, that will be enough. Kade felt the weight of Eleanor's gaze on him but kept his attention on his plate. Connor is right. Finish your breakfast and we will ride into Platteville. You can meet Mrs. Henderson and see if there is a possibility of work. An hour later, they were on their way to town, this time with Eleanor riding one of the gentler mares from the ranch. She sat her horse well, with the ease of someone who had learned to ride as a child, and Kade found himself watching her more than he should, noting the way the morning sun brought out the red highlights in her hair, the way her eyes took in the landscape with genuine interest. It is beautiful here, she said as they rode. So different from Missouri. Everything is bigger somehow, more open. It gets in your blood, Kade said. I spent a year back east after my father died, living with an uncle and learning about business and numbers. I thought I would go mad from feeling closed in. The moment I turned 18, I came home and never left again. Do you never want to see the world? I have seen enough of it to know that this is where I want to be. Platteville was busier in full daylight, with wagons and horses filling the street, people going about their business. Kade led them to the schoolhouse, a simple wooden building at the edge of town with a bell tower and a small yard where children played during recess. Right now, the yard was empty, the children inside at their lessons, their voices a muffled chorus through the open windows. They tied their horses and went inside, where they found Mrs. Henderson at her desk, peering at a ledger through spectacles so thick they made her eyes look enormous. She looked up at their entrance and smiled, though Kade could tell she could not quite make out their faces from that distance. Kade Whitmore, is that you? She called. Yes, madam, Kade said, moving closer. I brought someone I think you should meet. This is Miss Eleanor Ramsey. She is a teacher from St. Louis and she is looking for work. Mrs. Henderson's face brightened with interest. A teacher? Come closer, dear, and let me look at you. Eleanor approached the desk, and Mrs. Henderson studied her with those magnified eyes. You are young, she observed. I am 22, Eleanor said, but I have been teaching since I was 18. I assisted at Miss Morton's Academy for young ladies, and I have experience with students of all ages. Can you teach reading, writing, and arithmetic? Yes, madam. Also history, geography, and music if needed. Music? Mrs. Henderson looked delighted. We have not had music education in years. Do you play? Piano and violin, Eleanor said, though I no longer have access to either instrument. The church has a piano that is rarely used. I am sure Pastor Williams would allow lessons there. Mrs. Henderson set down her pen. I will be frank with you, Miss Ramsey. I am too old for this work. My eyes are failing, and I find I do not have the energy I once did to manage 30 children of varying ages and abilities. The town has been growing, and we need at least one more teacher, possibly two. If you are willing, I would like to offer you a position starting immediately. The pay is not grand, but it includes lodging in the teacherage next door and meals provided by the families on a rotating basis. Eleanor's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hope, relief. I would be honored to accept, she said. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You do not know what this means to me. I think I have some idea, the older woman said kindly. Kade, you have done a good deed bringing her to me. Now, Miss Ramsey, if you would like to observe today's lessons, you can start properly on Monday. That will give you time to settle in and prepare. They stayed at the school for several hours, with Eleanor observing the lessons and getting to know the children. Cade found himself making excuses to stay, watching as she interacted with the students. She was patient and kind but firm when needed, and the children responded to her with a mix of curiosity and respect. By the time they left, Mrs. Henderson was already talking about dividing the students into two groups, with Eleanor taking the younger children. "I cannot believe it," Eleanor said as they rode back toward the ranch. "I have a position. I have a home. A week ago, I was sleeping on trains and wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, and now everything is falling into place." "Things have a way of working out," Cade said, though he felt an unexpected heaviness at the thought of Eleanor moving into the teacherage, of not having her at the ranch anymore. "I owe you everything," Eleanor said, turning in her saddle to look at him. "If you had not stopped that morning, I do not know what would have happened to me." "You would have found a way," Cade said. "You are stronger than you think." They spent the rest of the week in a strange sort of limbo. Eleanor stayed at the ranch, helping with meals and household tasks in a way that felt natural rather than obligatory. She proved to be an excellent cook, and Connor declared her biscuits the best he had ever tasted. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk while the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire. Cade found himself looking forward to those conversations, to the sound of Eleanor's voice and the way her mind worked. She was intelligent and curious, asking questions about ranching and cattle and the land itself. She told stories about growing up in St. Louis, about her complicated relationship with her parents, about the dreams she had set aside when she had agreed to marry a man she did not love. "I think I always knew I would not go through with it," she admitted one evening, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "But it took me a long time to find the courage to admit it to myself. My parents were so pleased with the match, and I did not want to disappoint them. But in the end, I disappointed them anyway by leaving. I suppose that is the nature of choosing your own path." "Do you regret it?" Cade asked. "No," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I regret the pain I caused them, but I do not regret leaving. For the first time in my life, I feel like I am making my own choices, living my own life. That is worth everything." Cade thought about those words long after Eleanor had gone to bed, sitting alone on the porch with his own thoughts. He was 31 years old, and he had never seriously considered marriage. There had been women, of course, but no one who had made him think about forever. He told himself it was because the ranch demanded all his attention, because he was too busy building something lasting to think about building a family. But maybe it was just that he had never met someone who made him want to try, someone like Eleanor. The thought startled him, and he pushed it away. She had been under his roof for barely a week. He was feeling protective, that was all. Drawn to her, certainly, but that did not mean anything significant. She would move into the teacherage on Monday, and they would be friends, neighbors. Nothing more. But on Sunday, their last full day together before Eleanor moved to town, Cade found himself suggesting a ride up to the high meadow, a place he loved but rarely had reason to visit. Eleanor agreed eagerly, and they packed a simple lunch and set out mid-morning, with the sun warm on their backs and the world green with spring growth. The meadow lay in a fold of the foothills, a secret place carpeted with wildflowers and surrounded by pines. A creek ran through it, clear and cold from snowmelt, and the view stretched for miles in every direction. Eleanor dismounted and stood looking at it all with an expression of wonder. "This is the most beautiful place I have ever seen," she said softly. Cade felt a swell of pride, as though he had personally created this landscape for her approval. They spread a blanket near the creek and ate their lunch of cold chicken, bread, and early strawberries. Afterward, Eleanor took off her shoes and stockings, hiking up her skirts to wade in the creek like a child, laughing at the cold. Kade watched her, memorizing the sound of that laughter, the picture she made with her hair coming loose and her face flushed with joy. "Come in," she called to him. "It is wonderful." He should not. It was too familiar, too intimate. But he found himself pulling off his boots anyway, rolling up his pants and joining her in the rushing water. She splashed him, and he splashed back. And suddenly they were both laughing like children, cold and wet and happier than either had been in a long time. When they finally collapsed back on the blanket, breathless and dripping, Eleanor turned to him with a smile that faded as their eyes met. Something shifted in the air between them, something warm and electric. Kade saw the moment Eleanor felt it too, saw her breath catch, her eyes widen slightly. "Kade," she said, and there was a question in his name. He should move away, break the moment. Instead, he reached out and tucked a damp strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Her skin was soft and cold from the creek, and he felt her lean into his touch just slightly. "Eleanor," he said, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung between them, terrifying and true. Eleanor stared at him, her green eyes searching his face for any sign that he might be joking or lying. She must have found only honesty because her expression softened into something tender. "I think I have been falling in love with you since that first morning," she whispered. "I told myself I was being foolish, that I was confusing gratitude with something more. But it is not gratitude, is it?" "No," Kade said. "It is not." He kissed her then, a soft and careful kiss that tasted of strawberries and creek water and promise. She kissed him back with equal care, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, over his heart. It was a beginning, tentative and sweet, and when they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I am supposed to move into the teacherage tomorrow," Eleanor said. "I know. But I do not want to leave the ranch. I do not want to leave you." "Then do not," Kade said simply. "Stay, court me properly. Let me court you, see where this goes. People will talk," Eleanor warned. A single woman living with two unmarried men. "Let them talk. Connor can chaperone. And if it makes you more comfortable, we can ask Mrs. Henderson to stay some weekends, or you can stay in town some nights. But Eleanor, I have waited 31 years to feel like this. I am not going to let propriety or gossip take it away before we even have a chance to see what we could be together." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing absent patterns on his shirt. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I will stay. But Kade, I need to be clear about something. I will not be a kept woman. I will not be dependent on you. I will teach and earn my own way, and whatever happens between us, it will be because we both choose it freely, not because I have no other options." "I would not want it any other way," Kade said, meaning it absolutely. They rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, and if they rode closer together than strictly necessary, their legs occasionally brushing, neither mentioned it. Connor took one look at their faces when they arrived and grinned knowingly but said nothing, for which Kade was grateful. That night, sitting on the porch after Eleanor had gone to bed, Connor finally spoke up. "You are going to marry her." It was not a question, but Kade answered anyway. "If she will have me, but not right away. She needs time to be sure to build her own life here first. I will not rush her." "You are a better man than most," Connor said, "but for what it is worth, I think she is good for you. I have not seen you this happy since before Mother died." "She is good for me," Kade agreed quietly. "I just hope I can be good enough for her." The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Eleanor began teaching at the school, winning over even the most skeptical parents with her dedication and skill. She stayed at the ranch 4 nights a week and in the teacherage in town 3 nights, a compromise that satisfied propriety while allowing her and Kade to spend time together. They courted slowly and intentionally. Kade would ride into town at lunch to eat with Eleanor, or he would wait for her after school and they would walk together, talking about everything and nothing. On weekends, they would take long rides into the hills, or Eleanor would help with ranch work, learning to mend fences and check cattle with the same determination she brought to everything. Connor appointed himself unofficial chaperone and took his duties seriously, often appearing at inconvenient moments to make terrible jokes or ask unnecessary questions. But he also gave them space when they needed it, disappearing into town or the far pastures when Eleanor visited in the evenings. As spring turned into summer, Kade felt his certainty growing. Eleanor was everything he had not known he wanted. Strong and independent, yet willing to ask for help when she needed it. Intelligent and well-read, but curious about his world and eager to learn. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fashion or artifice and everything to do with the light in her eyes when she was happy. He loved the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she talked to the horses as though they could understand her, the way she fell asleep during evening conversations on the porch, her head drooping against his shoulder. He loved her stubbornness and her kindness in equal measure, the way she could be fierce as a wildcat when defending her students and gentle as lamb when tending a hurt animal. And slowly, carefully, he began to plan a future that included her. It was early July when everything nearly fell apart. Kade had ridden into town to meet Eleanor after school, as had become his custom on Fridays. But when he arrived at the schoolhouse, he found her in conversation with a man he did not recognize, a well-dressed stranger with an expensive hat and a coat that marked him as someone from back east. Eleanor's face was pale, her posture rigid, and even from a distance Kade could see she was distressed. He approached slowly, listening. "I have explained this to you, Christopher," Eleanor was saying, her voice tight. "I am not coming back. We are finished." "You are being ridiculous, Eleanor," the man said. His voice was smooth and cultured, with an edge of condescension that made Kade's hands clench into fists. "You have had your little adventure, made your point. Now it is time to come home and stop this nonsense. Your parents are worried sick, and I have been searching for you for months." "Then you have wasted your time," Eleanor said. "I am not yours to search for. I am not yours at all. I ended our engagement before I left St. Louis, if you recall." "You were emotional and irrational," Christopher said dismissively. "You did not mean it. Women often become overwrought about things that do not truly matter." Kade had heard enough. He stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Eleanor and the stranger. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying a note of steel. Christopher looked him up and down with obvious disdain, taking in the worn work clothes, the dust, the simple leather vest. "And who might you be?" "The local sheriff, Kade Whitmore," Kade said. "And you are?" "Christopher Bellingham," the man said, as though the name should mean something. "Miss Ramsey's betrothed." "Former betrothed," Eleanor corrected sharply, "as I have told you repeatedly." "Miss Ramsey is not betrothed to anyone," Kade said. "She ended that relationship, as she has explained." "I think it is time for you to leave." Christopher's eyes narrowed. "I see what has happened here. You have taken advantage of a vulnerable woman, filled her head with romantic notions about frontier life. Eleanor, surely you can see this is beneath you. You are a lady of quality, not some rancher's wife." "Do not presume to tell me what I am or what I can see," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with anger. "You have no power over me, Christopher. You never truly wanted me anyway. You wanted a wife who would look the other way while you kept your mistress, who would host your parties and bear your children and never question anything you did. I am not that woman. I will never be that woman." "You will regret this," Christopher said. his cultured facade cracking to reveal something uglier beneath. You think you can make a life here in this backwater town with this uneducated cowboy? You will be bored within a year, desperate to return to civilization. And when you come crawling back, I will not be waiting. Good, Eleanor said. I would not want you to waste your time. Christopher looked like he wanted to say more, but something in Cade's expression must have warned him against it. He straightened his coat with an angry jerk and turned on his heel, stalking toward the hotel where, presumably, he was staying. Cade and Eleanor stood in silence until he was out of sight. Then Eleanor's knees buckled. Cade caught her, holding her steady while she shook. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry you had to see that, had to hear those things he said about you. I do not care what he said about me, Cade said quietly, but I care very much about how he spoke to you. Are you all right? I do not know, Eleanor admitted. I thought I had left all of that behind. I thought I was free. But seeing him here, hearing him say those things, it brought it all back. The feeling of being trapped, of being seen as property rather than a person. Cade guided her to the steps of the schoolhouse and they sat together in the late afternoon sun. You are not trapped, he said firmly. You are free. He cannot make you do anything. You have a job, a home, a life here. And Eleanor, whatever happens between us, that will always be true. You are your own person. You answer to no one but yourself. He said you were uneducated, Eleanor said, a spark of anger in her voice. As though reading Latin makes a person better than someone who can heal a sick calf or build a barn or break a horse with patience instead of cruelty. You are worth 10 of him, Kade Whitmore. 100. Cade felt warmth spread through his chest at her fierce defense of him. I know my worth, he said gently, and I know his opinion means nothing, but thank you for defending me. They sat together until the sun began to set, talking quietly about Christopher's unexpected appearance and what it might mean. Eleanor was adamant that she would not be intimidated into leaving, and Cade believed her. But he also saw the shadow that had fallen over her usual brightness, the way her hands still trembled slightly. Come back to the ranch tonight, he said. Even though it is Friday and you usually stay in town. I do not want you to be alone, and I do not trust that Christopher will not try to speak to you again. Eleanor nodded gratefully. I would like that, thank you. They rode back together as the stars came out. And when they arrived, Connor took one look at Eleanor's face and immediately set about making her favorite tea and putting together a plate of the cookies she had baked that weekend. He did not ask questions, simply provided comfort in his own way, and Cade was grateful for his brother's sensitivity. That night, long after Eleanor had gone to bed, there was a knock at the front door. Cade answered it to find Christopher Bellingham standing on his porch, looking significantly less composed than he had that afternoon. I want to speak to Eleanor, he demanded. No, Cade said simply. You cannot keep her from me. I have every right. You have no rights here, Cade interrupted, his voice hard. Eleanor has made her wishes clear. You need to accept that and leave. I could make trouble for you, Christopher said, a threat implicit in his tone. I have connections, money. I could destroy your reputation, ruin your business. You could try, Cade said. But I think you will find that things work differently out here than they do in St. Louis. Connections and money matter less than a man's word and his actions. And right now, your actions are those of a man who cannot accept that a woman has the right to refuse him. That does not play well in any town, but especially not in one where women are scarce and valued. Christopher's face flushed with anger. She will regret this. She will regret you. If she does, that will be her choice to make, Cade said. Just as leaving you was her choice. Now get off my property before I remove you myself. For a moment, Cade thought Christopher might actually take a swing at him. But the other man seemed to think better of it, turning and stumbling back toward his horse. Kade watched him ride away into the darkness, then went back inside and locked the door behind him, something he rarely did. Connor was waiting in the hallway. "Trouble?" "Nothing I could not handle," Kade said. "But keep an eye out over the next few days. I do not trust him not to try something stupid." "Will do." But Christopher left town the next morning on the early stage, and after a week with no word or sighting, they began to relax. Eleanor slowly returned to her usual self, the shadow lifting from her eyes. And if anything, the incident seemed to have strengthened her resolve, made her more certain of her choices. "I have been thinking," she said one evening in late July as they sat by the creek on the ranch property, watching the water flow past. "About us, about the future." Cade's heart kicked up a beat, but he kept his voice steady. "What have you been thinking?" "That I am tired of being careful, of moving slowly. I know what I want, Kade. I have known for weeks, maybe months. I want to build a life here with you. I want to teach and make a difference in this community, and I want to come home to you every night. I want to argue with you about things that do not matter and agree with you about things that do. I want to know that whatever challenges come, we will face them together." Kade turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "Eleanor Ramsey, are you proposing to me?" She laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I suppose I am. Is that terribly forward of me?" "It is perfect," Kade said. "But I would like to do this properly." He stood and pulled her to her feet, then, to her obvious surprise, dropped to one knee in the grass beside the creek. "Eleanor, from the moment I saw you sleeping on that bench, something in my life shifted. You have brought light and laughter and love into a place I did not even realize was dark. You challenge me to be better, to think differently, to see the world through new eyes. I love your strength and your kindness, your intelligence and your passion. I love the way you care for your students and the way you talk to the horses and the way you burn biscuits when you are distracted by a good book. I love all of you, every part, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." Kade stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and hope he felt. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "When?" Eleanor asked. "When should we marry?" "As soon as you want," Kade said. "Tomorrow, if you wish, or we can wait, plan a proper ceremony." "I do not need a proper ceremony," Eleanor said. "But I would like a few weeks to prepare, to make sure my students are settled with Mrs. Henderson for a few days. And I would like to write to my parents, tell them about you, invite them if they wish to come." "Will they come?" "I do not know," Eleanor admitted. "But I would like to offer them the chance. I left badly, and while I do not regret my choice, I regret the pain I caused them. This is a way to mend that bridge if they are willing." They decided on a date in mid-September, after the summer heat had broken but before the mountain snows began. Eleanor wrote to her parents, a carefully worded letter that explained her new life and her love for Kade, and invited them to the wedding. Kade half expected no response, but to both their surprise, a telegram arrived 3 weeks later. "We will come. Arriving September 10th. Mother and Father." Eleanor cried when she read it, and Kade held her while she did, understanding that these were tears of relief and hope. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Eleanor worked with the town seamstress to create a simple but beautiful dress of cream silk. Kade bought a new suit from the general store and had his boots polished until they shone. Connor appointed himself best man and took his duties seriously, planning a celebration at the ranch after the ceremony. Eleanor's parents arrived on the appointed day, stepping off the stage looking tired and uncertain. Eleanor ran to them and after a moment's hesitation, her mother opened her arms and embraced her daughter. Her father stood back, his face unreadable, but when Eleanor turned to him, he pulled her close. "We have missed you," he said gruffly. "And while we may not understand all your choices, we love you. We want you to be happy." "I am happy," Eleanor said. "So happy, and I want you to meet Kade." The meeting was awkward at first, with Eleanor's father, Edmund Ramsey, clearly skeptical of this Western rancher who had stolen his daughter's heart. But Kade answered every question honestly and directly, and by the end of dinner, Edmund was grudgingly nodding along to Kade's explanations of ranch management and cattle breeding. Eleanor's mother, Margaret, was warmer, clearly relieved to see her daughter healthy and glowing with happiness. "She loves you very much," Margaret said to Kade when they had a moment alone. "I can see it in the way she looks at you, the way she speaks about you. Take care of her." "With my life," Kade promised. The wedding took place on a perfect September afternoon, with the aspen trees turning gold on the mountainsides and the air crisp and clear. They were married by Pastor Williams in the small church, with Connor and Mrs. Henderson standing as witnesses, and half the town crowding into the pews. Eleanor wore wildflowers in her hair and carried a simple bouquet of sage and daisies. Kade wore his new suit and could not stop smiling when Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife. Kade kissed his bride with such tenderness that several women in the congregation wept. Eleanor kissed him back with equal love, and when they turned to face their friends and family, the applause was deafening. The celebration at the ranch lasted until well after dark, with music and dancing and more food than any reasonable number of people could eat. Eleanor danced with her father, and Kade saw them talking seriously, saw Edmund nod and clasp his daughter's hand. Whatever was said seemed to bring peace to both of them, and when the older man shook Kade's hand later, his grip was firm and his eyes held approval. "You are a good man," Edmund said. "Better than the one we had chosen for her. I see that now. Make her happy." Every day, Kade said, Eleanor's parents stayed for a week, during which Edmund developed a fascination with ranch life and Margaret bonded with Mrs. Henderson over their shared love of teaching. When they finally left, it was with promises to return the following summer, and Eleanor waved goodbye with tears in her eyes but a smile on her face. "I never thought I would have this," she said to Kade that night as they lay in bed in the room that was now theirs, the room that had been his parents'. "A life I chose, a husband I love, a reconciliation with my family. It feels like a miracle." "It is not a miracle," Kade said, pulling her close. "It is what you deserve, what we both deserve." The years that followed were full of hard work and deep joy. Eleanor continued to teach, eventually taking over the school entirely when Mrs. Henderson retired. She was beloved by her students and their families, known for her kindness and her high standards in equal measure. Kade and Connor expanded the ranch, buying more land and building a larger herd. The Double W became known throughout Colorado for the quality of its cattle and horses. In the spring of 1885, Eleanor gave birth to their first child, a son they named William after Kade's father. He had Kade's dark hair and Eleanor's green eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he had both his parents wrapped around his tiny finger. Kade proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk the floor with his crying son, teaching him to ride almost before he could walk, reading to him from Eleanor's collection of books every night. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Grace, who had Eleanor's auburn hair and Kade's quiet determination. She was followed by another son, James, and then a second daughter, Caroline. The house that had once felt too large was suddenly filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of family life. Connor married a widow from town, a woman named Sarah with 2 children of her own, and built a house on the far side of the ranch. The two families were close, their children growing up together, running wild across the ranch lands and fishing in the creek where Kade and Eleanor had first kissed. Eleanor's parents came to visit every summer, and Edmund softened with each grandchild, becoming the doting grandfather no one had expected. He taught William about business and numbers, while Margaret taught Grace to sew and read. The breach that had once seemed insurmountable was healed by time and love and the shared joy of family. On their 10th anniversary, Kade surprised Eleanor by taking her back to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. They rode up together just as they had that day so many years before, leaving the children with Connor and Sarah. The meadow was exactly as it had been, carpeted with wildflowers and full of birdsong. "You ever regret it?" Kade asked as they spread their blanket by the creek. "Giving up the life you could have had, the society and culture of St. Louis?" "Never," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to live, Kade. You are the man I was meant to love. Everything that came before was just preparation for this." "I love you," Kade said, the same words he had spoken in this spot a decade ago. "More now than even then, if that is possible." "It is possible," Eleanor said, smiling, "because I love you more now, too. I loved the man who woke me on that bench and offered me safety. But I love even more the man who has been my partner, my friend, my love through everything that has come since. The man who changes diapers and fixes broken fence posts, who reads bedtime stories and teaches our children to be kind. The man who still looks at me like I am the most precious thing in his world." "You are," Kade said simply. "You and our children. You are my whole world." They spent the afternoon there, talking and laughing and remembering all the moments that had brought them to this place. When they finally rode home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and their children were waiting on the porch, tumbling down the steps to greet them with hugs and stories about their day. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Kade and Eleanor sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a coyote called in the distance. Eleanor rested her head on Kade's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You remember the first time we sat here?" Eleanor asked. "I remember every time we have sat here," Kade said. "But yes, I remember that first night. You told me about leaving St. Louis, about your failed engagement. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met." "I was terrified," Eleanor admitted. "But being here with you, I found my courage. You gave me that, Kade. You gave me a place to be brave." "You gave yourself that," Kade said. "I just gave you a safe place to land while you found your wings." Years continued to pass in the rhythm of seasons and ranch life. The children grew, William becoming a skilled horseman and rancher like his father, Grace developing a love of teaching like her mother. James proved to have a gift for working with animals, while Caroline inherited her grandmother Margaret's talent for music and played piano at church every Sunday. When William was 18, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a smart and capable girl named Lucy. Kade watched his son fall in love with the same helpless, joyful intensity he himself had felt, and he understood with new clarity how his father-in-law must have felt, watching his daughter choose her own path. But Lucy was a good match for William, and when they married the following year, it was with both families' blessings. Grace shocked everyone by announcing at 17 that she wanted to go to college, to study at the newly established University of Colorado in Boulder. Kade's first instinct was to refuse, to keep his daughter safe at home. But Eleanor reminded him gently that they had raised their children to be brave, to follow their dreams just as she had followed hers. So they let Grace go, with money for tuition and a promise to write every week. The letters she sent home were full of excitement and learning, and when she returned for the summer, she was more herself than ever, confident and full of plans. She would become a teacher like her mother, she declared, but she would also fight for women to have the vote, to have rights and opportunities beyond the home. Kade did not fully understand it, but he supported her anyway, because that was what love meant. James stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and uncle, proving to have an instinct for ranching that rivaled Kade's own. He was quieter than his siblings, more introspective, but his gentle way with animals and his steady presence made him invaluable. At 20, he married a Cheyenne woman named Morning Bird, whose family had moved to the area years before. It was an unconventional match that raised eyebrows in town, but James was adamant, and Morning Bird proved to be a skilled rancher and a loving daughter-in-law. She taught Eleanor and the other children about the plants and animals of the region, about the history of the land before the settlers came, and the family was richer for her presence. Caroline, the youngest, was the wild card. She inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's stubbornness in equal measure, and by 15, she was already running parts of the ranch operation that most grown men struggled with. She had no interest in marriage, she declared, only in horses and music and living life on her own terms. Kade recognized his own independence in her and made no attempt to change her mind. As Kade and Eleanor entered their 50s, the ranch was thriving under the management of their children. William ran the cattle operation with his wife, while James managed the horses with Morning Bird. Connor and Sarah's children were involved too, making the Double W a true family enterprise that sprawled across thousands of acres. Kade found himself with more time than he had had in years, and he spent it with Eleanor, taking long rides into the mountains, traveling occasionally to Denver or even back to St. Louis to visit what remained of her family. They attended the weddings of their grandchildren, held newborn great-grandchildren, and watched the town of Platteville grow from a rough mining settlement into a proper community with schools and churches, and a library that Eleanor had been instrumental in founding. On their 30th anniversary, Eleanor surprised Kade by arranging for them to spend a night in town at the hotel, something they had never done. They dressed in their finest clothes and ate dinner in the hotel restaurant like courting sweethearts, laughing at the memories of all the years between that first meeting and this moment. "I have loved every day of it," Eleanor said as they walked through the town after dinner, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. "Even the hard days, the times when money was tight or the children were sick, or we fought about something that does not even matter now. I have loved all of it because I was living it with you. The best decision I ever made was stopping to wake you that morning," Kade said. "Everything good in my life came from that one choice." "The best decision I ever made was trusting you," Eleanor replied. A strange man offering his guest room to a woman sleeping on a bench. It could have ended so differently. But somehow I knew, even then, that you were someone worth trusting. They stood in front of the old general store, looking at the bench that was still there, the same bench where Eleanor had been sleeping 30 years ago. It looked smaller now, more weathered, but it was the same piece of wood that had changed both their lives. "Should we recreate the moment?" Eleanor asked with a mischievous smile. "I could lie down and you could wake me," Kade laughed. "I think we are both too old for that kind of play." "Speak for yourself," Eleanor said, but she was laughing too. They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, and that night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in a room that was too quiet without the sounds of ranch life around them, Kade held his wife close and counted his blessings. A woman who had become his best friend and greatest love. children who were finding their own paths in the world, grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward the best of both families, land and work that gave his life meaning and purpose, but most of all, love. The kind of love that grew deeper and stronger with every passing year, that weathered storms and celebrated joys, that was built on respect and trust and choosing each other every single day. As they moved into their 60s, age began to slow them both. Kade's joints ached in the cold, and Eleanor's eyes grew weary from years of reading and teaching. But they were blessed with good health overall, and they continued to be active parts of the ranch and the community. Eleanor finally retired from teaching at 65, handing over her school to a young woman from Denver who had the same passion for education that Eleanor herself had brought 30 years earlier. It was bittersweet, leaving the work that had defined so much of her adult life, but Eleanor found new purpose in writing, documenting the history of Platteville and the surrounding area, collecting stories from the old-timers before they were lost to time. Kade gradually transferred more of the ranch operations to William and James, though he still rode out most mornings to check on things, unable to fully let go of the work that had shaped him. He took pride in watching his sons make their own decisions, sometimes different from what he would have chosen, but usually just as good or better. The Double W was in capable hands for another generation. They were 70 years old, married for 40 years, when Connor died suddenly of a heart failure while working in the barn. It was the first real loss they had faced since Eleanor's parents had passed, and it hit both of them hard. Sarah was devastated, and Kade spent long hours with her, helping with the practical matters while Eleanor provided emotional support. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Colorado, a testament to the life Connor had lived and the relationships he had built. Kade gave the eulogy, his voice breaking only once when he talked about how his younger brother had always been his best friend, his most trusted partner, his favorite person to share a joke with over morning coffee. "He lived a good life," Kade said to Eleanor that night as they sat on their porch, looking out at the ranch that had been built by two brothers with a dream. "He had love, family, work that mattered. I cannot ask for more than that when my own time comes." "Do not talk about your time coming," Eleanor said sharply. "I am not ready to face this world without you. You will never have to," Kade promised. "When I go, I am taking you with me." Eleanor laughed despite her tears. "That is not how death works." "Then we will simply have to live forever," Kade said. They did not live forever, of course. No one does. But they lived long enough to see the turn of the century, to watch the Wild West they had known transform into something new and modern. They lived to see automobiles arrive in Platteville, to watch their grandchildren learn to drive them while their horses looked on with what Kade swore was indignation. They lived to see Grace become a prominent educator and suffragette, fighting for women's rights across the state. They lived to see William's grandchildren, their own great-great-grandchildren, born into a world that would have been unrecognizable to the young people who had met on a bench in 1883. On a warm spring morning in 1908, 50 years after their first meeting, Kade and Eleanor sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both 81 years old, their hair white, their faces lined with the years, but their hands were still clasped together, their love still as strong as ever. "You know what day it is?" Eleanor asked. "Tuesday," Kade guessed. "It is the anniversary of the day you woke me on that bench," Eleanor said. "May 15th. 50 years ago today my life began again." Kade raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. 50 years, he marveled. Where did they go? "Into this," Eleanor said, gesturing at the ranch spread before them, at the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were scattered across the property, at the life they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. Into everything we created. Into us. "Would you change anything?" Kade asked. "If you could go back, knowing everything that would come." "Not a single thing," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Except maybe I would have kissed you sooner." Kade laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. "I cannot argue with that." They sat together as the sun rose higher, warming the valley, bringing light to every corner of the land they loved. Their children and grandchildren began to arrive, as had been planned, for a celebration of their anniversary. There would be food and music and stories, laughter and love and the presence of 4 generations of family. But for this moment, it was just the two of them, the cowboy who had stopped to help a woman in need, and the woman who had trusted a stranger with her future. 2 people who had found each other at the right moment, in the right place, and had chosen each other every day since. "I love you," Kade said, the same words he had spoken countless times over 50 years, words that never grew old or lost their meaning. "I love you too," Eleanor replied, her voice strong despite her age, her eyes still that same impossible green. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." And as their family descended upon them with hugs and kisses, and the beautiful chaos that only a large family can bring, Kade and Eleanor sat at the center of it all, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. They had started with nothing but a chance encounter and a willingness to trust, and they had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Years later, when both had finally passed, peacefully and within days of each other as though neither could bear to be without the other for long, their children found letters they had written to each one. Kade's letters spoke of pride and love, of the joy his children had brought him, of his certainty that the ranch and the family would continue to thrive. But in the letter to William, his eldest, there was one line that stood out. "Taking a chance on love was the bravest thing I ever did. Do not let fear keep you from being brave." Eleanor's letters were longer, more detailed, full of advice and memories and expressions of love. But in each one, she included the same story, the story of how she had been at her lowest point, sleeping on a bench with no money and no prospects, and how a stranger had shown her kindness that changed everything. "Never underestimate the power of compassion," she wrote. "One act of kindness, one moment of choosing to help rather than pass by, can change the entire course of a life. Your father changed mine. Be the person who changes someone else's." The bench in Platteville where Eleanor had been sleeping that fateful night still exists, though few remember its significance now. But the Double W Ranch continues to operate, run by the 6th generation of Whitmores, a testament to what 2 people can build when they start with love and trust. And in the ranch house, hanging in a place of honor, is a painting of a young couple by a creek, their feet bare and their faces lit with joy, captured by an artist granddaughter who wanted to preserve the moment that started it all. A cowboy and a woman on a bench. A offer of help, freely given and gratefully accepted. And from that simple beginning, a love story for the ages. The end.